The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 13th chapter. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in this world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. He poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that he had tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, he put on his robe and had returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Jesus then said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. If you look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. Just to clarify, we do have worship tomorrow twice on Good Friday. We have Stations of the Cross tomorrow on Good Friday at noon, and then worship at 7 o'clock. And then we have the prayer vigil on Saturday. So, what's that?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm like, when do I have to show up? I don't know. So Ann gave me tomorrow off. That's all right. No, she didn't. So Stations of the Cross at noon tomorrow, worship at 7. And then the prayer vigil on Saturday. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is the Christ?" While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. "Don't do anything with that innocent man. For I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. And they all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. And they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took the basin of water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." And with that, Pilate washed his hands of Jesus, pushing away the basin and his part of the execution and crucifixion of Jesus. The basin has appeared in front of many people throughout history who had the opportunity to make the choice between accepting responsibility or washing their hands and pushing the basin away. Moments after Pilate pushes away the basin, it appears in front of Peter, who several times is confronted with the fact that he is a follower of Jesus. Peter washes his hands of Jesus by denying him 3 times before the cock crows. "I don't know what you're talking about." Right? "I don't know that man. I do not know that man." And Peter pushes away the basin. The basin is presented to leaders of nations, time and time again, as they are confronted with war and tyranny and crimes against humanity. The basin stands before them, forcing them to choose. Do they stand up against such actions? Or look the other way? Accept responsibility? Or wash their hands and push the basin away? We have decided to remain neutral in this circumstance. We will not interfere in the policies of another government. And again, the basin is refused, passed on to another and another. The basin passes throughout society and into local communities. Neighborhoods struggle with issues of homelessness, unemployment, and rising crime. They are confronted with the choice to assist in providing solutions or refusing responsibility, refusing to get involved. Not in my backyard. They brought it on themselves. If they would just get a job like the rest of us, they wouldn't need our help. Communities refuse to accept responsibility in the issues and push away the basin, many times with anger and vindictiveness, but more often than not, with apathy. The basin travels even deeper into the fabric of society and into the family structure itself. Family members wrestle with differences of opinions, lifestyles, or beliefs. Members are confronted with the choice of dialogue and understanding or shame, hate, and denial. He is dead to me. Don't ever come back in this house again. We don't talk about that. And again, the basin and the responsibility is rejected. Hands are washed, relationships are severed, and no one takes ownership. The basin is moved into somebody else's hands, and that someone is you. And you. All of us hold the basin. We are all presented with the basin throughout our lives. What choices do we make? Do we take the easy way out? How clean are our hands with all the washing that we do? You can't hold me responsible for the actions of somebody else. My parents made me this way, blame them. I've always been this way. You can't expect me to change now. Throughout our lives, we push the basin away many, many times. Even during the pandemic, people were refusing to take responsibility for passing the virus, and they would just do what they wanted without considering how their actions might affect others. Jesus was presented with the basin, but instead of washing his hands with it, he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He took the task that slaves would do. He washes their dirty, stinky feet. And he expects his followers to do the same. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. Jesus accepts responsibility in a manner of humility and servanthood and teaches his disciples to do the same. Jesus chooses to hold on to the basin instead of pushing it away. Maundy, mandatum, mandate. We get the name from Maundy Thursday from this text we just heard in John 13, where Jesus gives us a new mandate, a new commandment. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you just love one another. We are commanded to love. The world we know will know that we are Jesus' disciples in the way that we love one another. All of this must be done in the manner and to the level that Christ has loved us. That is the commandment. That is the mandate. That is why we gather on Maundy Thursday, to hear this gospel every single year. Jesus commands us to allow him to wash our feet through the hands of others. Jesus commands us to assist him in washing others' feet through the use of our hands. It is in this action that people will know that we are Jesus' disciples. Jesus chooses to hold on to the basin instead of pushing it away. He chooses to use the basin to wash the disciples' feet instead of washing his hands of even them. And this is good news. The disciples pushed the basin away by betraying Jesus, by denying Jesus, and by walking away from Jesus. They didn't love others as they loved themselves. They pushed away the basin. We betray Christ in our actions. We deny Christ in our words. Our betrayal and denial occur every time we push the basin away. We don't love others as we love ourselves, and we certainly don't love others as Christ has loved us. And we don't right the wrongs that we have done. We don't heal the wounds of hurt and pain that we have caused. We do not accept the responsibility for our actions as disciples of Christ. But Jesus takes the basin and washes the feet of his disciples. Even Judas is present to share in the foot washing and in the meal. Jesus did wash their feet. And Jesus takes the place of the lowest slave. He accepts the basin of servanthood and loves them to the very end. He loves his disciples knowing they will deny and betray him. Jesus provides for us, even as we are deniers and betrayers. He took the form of a slave for us. He provides us with baptism and communion, and he loves us to the very end. The basin that is passed along is the basin that holds the water for baptism. By our baptism, we are called to take the form of a slave. By our baptism, we are called to love others as Christ has loved us. By accepting the basin of our baptism, people will know us as Christ's disciples. I used to watch a TV show called Undercover Boss. It's not on anymore, right? And there was an episode where there was a CEO of a company that managed 17 amusement parks across the country. And they lifted themselves up as a Christian company. And during the opening scene of the show, they show a picture of the CEO's desk, and there's a statue on it, a bronze statue of a person sitting in a chair, and Jesus kneeling down over a basin and washing that person's feet. The CEO began to talk about how Christian behavior should be exhibited in everything that is done in the corporation. And he said that value is called servanthood. If anybody has worked through the Crossway Bible study systems, right, I've used it several times, their logo is Jesus kneeling, washing the feet of others for the same reasons, servanthood and love. By our baptism, we are called to take the form of a slave. By our baptism, we are called to love others as Christ has loved us. And by accepting the basin of our baptism, people will know us as Jesus' disciples. By this baptism, by this basin, we received God's living water, the power of the Holy Spirit, and marked with the cross of Christ forever. Jesus gives us a meal of his body and blood to sustain us in the time of trial. In the basin that Jesus carries for us, the basin of his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus uses this basin to wash us clean and provides us with the promise of standing before God forever. Every year at seminary, the opening worship, the opening communion service ended with the foot washing. The pastor of the community, the president of the seminary, and the academic dean would kneel down every year and wash the feet of every student, faculty, or staff. Humble servanthood from leadership to set an example. Tonight, our leaders will kneel down before you. And in humble service and as a sign of an example of how we are called to act for the world, we will wash your feet as a sign of our love for you, for Christ's love for you, for God's love for you and the world. We need to learn servanthood. Jesus cleanses us from this basin. We learn servanthood from this basin. And as disciples, we are called to kneel at the basin to wash one another's feet, ours and the world's, so that foot washing in a wide variety of expressions becomes the symbol of our love, of Christ's love, of God's love. And so, we wash the feet of the world.